Imagine standing on a dock in a busy harbor almost 2 centuries ago. You are watching a ship disappear over the horizon, carrying a letter that contains the most important news of your life. Once that wooden hull slips below the curve of the earth, that information is essentially gone. It exists in a kind of limbo, traveling no faster than the wind can blow or a horse can gallop. For thousands of years, this was the absolute ceiling of human ambition. We could build empires and sail across oceans, but our thoughts were always anchored to our bodies. If a king died or a war ended, the world often didn't find out until weeks or months later. We lived in a world of profound silence and deep isolation, where the distance between two cities was measured not in miles, but in the days of silence between them. We recently explored how this physical bottleneck was finally shattered by the arrival of the electric telegraph. We saw how pulses of energy replaced the exhaustion of a messenger, turning a weeks-long journey into a momentary flash across a wire. This technological leap did more than just move words. It forced us to rethink time itself, pushing us to abandon our local sundials for a synchronized global clock. But while the first phase of this story was about the invention of the tool, the second phase was a frantic, high-stakes race to string that tool across the planet. This was the moment humanity decided to physically wire the Earth, and in doing so, we changed the rhythm of our existence forever. Before the wire arrived, the primary problem was the agonizing gap of uncertainty. If you were a merchant in the early 19th century, you were essentially a gambler. You would send a cargo of grain or cloth to a distant port without any way of knowing if the market there had already collapsed. You were operating in the dark, relying on rumors that were already stale by the time they reached your ears. This lack of coordination wasn't just a business problem, it was a safety crisis. On the early railroads, two trains could be heading toward each other on the same track, and because there was no way to communicate faster than the locomotives moved, disaster was often unavoidable. The world was moving faster than its ability to stay organized, and that gap was becoming deadly. The turning point came when people realized that the telegraph wasn't just a novelty for scientists or a toy for the elite. It was a nervous system. The race began in earnest when governments and private investors saw that whoever controlled the wire controlled the flow of reality. In the middle of the 19th century, a fever took hold. It wasn't just about sending a message, it was about the sheer, frantic push to claim the territory between cities. Imagine the labor involved in this. Crews of men had to hack through dense forests, wade through swamps, and climb over mountain ranges, all to plant wooden poles and string a thin strand of copper or iron. They were literally stitching the landscape together, 1 mile at a time. This era was defined by a ruthless competition for dominance. Different companies didn't just want to build a line, they wanted to be the only line. In many cities, the sky became a chaotic web of black wires as rival firms competed for subscribers. It was a messy, experimental time where the standards were being written on the fly. Some tried to bury the wires in the ground, only to find that moisture and insects rotted the insulation in weeks. Others found that the wind and ice of winter would snap their connections like brittle thread. But the demand was so high that they simply kept building. The economics of the world were shifting. For the first time, the price of cotton in one city could affect the price in another, thousands of miles away, within the same hour. The local became the global, almost overnight. As the system scaled, the very nature of human language began to change. Sending a telegram was expensive, often charged by the word. This created a new kind of shorthand. People stopped writing long, flowery letters and started sending short, punchy sentences. The fluff was stripped away, and a new, urgent style of communication was born. This wasn't just a change in grammar, it was a change in how we thought. We began to value brevity and speed above all else. The telegraph created the first version of the breaking news alert. Suddenly, a newspaper didn't just tell you what happened last week, it told you what was happening right now, even if it was occurring on the other side of the continent. The ripple effects of this race were felt in every corner of society. Power began to centralize in ways that were previously impossible. A leader in a distant capital could now issue direct orders to a general in the field or a governor in a remote province. The old autonomy of the frontier began to vanish. If you could be reached by the wire, you could be controlled by the wire. This led to a massive shift in how wars were fought and how governments were managed. The fog of war didn't lift, but it changed shape. Information became a weapon that could be deployed as effectively as a cannon. But the real impact was felt by ordinary people in small, human-scale moments. Imagine a family that had sent a son off to seek his fortune in a distant land. Before the telegraph, they might not hear from him for a year. Now they could receive a message saying he had arrived safely before his ship had even finished unloading. It changed the emotional landscape of the world. The terrifying distance that used to separate us was suddenly bridged by a rhythmic clicking in a small office down at the train station. The telegraph operator became a vital figure in every town, a gatekeeper of secrets and a herald of both joy and tragedy. They sat in their booths, listening to a language of taps and silences that connected them to a vast, invisible web of other humans. This shift also created new winners and losers. Those who were near the wire thrived. Towns that were bypassed by the telegraph often withered away, much like those bypassed by the railroad. The network dictated where the money flowed and where the power stayed. We began to see the rise of massive corporations that could manage operations across an entire continent because they had the data to do so. The sheer scale of coordination that we take for granted today, from supply chains to air travel, has its roots in this frantic mid-century scramble to connect the dots on a map. Why does this still matter to us now? Because we are still living in the world the telegraph built. Every time you check a notification on your phone or send a quick text, you are using a descendant of that first copper wire. We are still obsessed with the race for speed. We still feel that same anxiety when the connection drops, and we are suddenly cast back into the silence of the 18th century. The telegraph was the first time we successfully uncoupled information from the physical world. It taught us that our thoughts could travel faster than our bodies, and we have never looked back. We have spent the last 2 centuries simply making that wire invisible and making the pulses of energy faster. The race to coordinate across long distances was a fundamental turning point in our story, but it wasn't the only struggle happening at the time. To understand how we actually built the physical machines that allowed this new, fast-paced world to function, we need to take a quick step sideways in our timeline. While the telegraph was connecting our minds, another revolution was happening in the workshops and factories of the world. Interchangeable parts and precision machining provided the missing context for the industrial age. And in the next episode, we will see how the ability to make identical things changed the way we made everything. If you are enjoying this journey through the foundations of our modern world, be sure to stay tuned.